Mock Draft Monday. We are just 16 days away from the NBA draft. I am so excited. Every day we get closer, I get more and more anxious. And I've had so much fun covering the 2025 NBA draft this cycle. So much work has gone into the videos. And you guys have shown so much love. So shout out to you if you're watching right now. I do really appreciate you a ton. Make sure to leave a like on today's video if you have enjoyed the content. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you are new. It does a huge wonder in supporting me and the channel here. And let's jump forward into the actual mock draft. Of course, first overall, the team with all the luck, seemingly the Dallas Mavericks, who jumped up to the first overall pick just despite a 1.8% chance to actually do so. And in the fallout of the Luka Doncic trade, the Mavericks had an ACL injury to Kyrie Irving. Anthony Davis missed time immediately upon arrival, basically. And yet, Dallas fell out of the playoffs. What felt like a disaster turns into a miracle for them as they land the first overall pick. And ultimately now have the opportunity to draft Cooper Flagg in this year's class. Cooper Flagg is such a special prospect and really dominated the college basketball scene, and I think that stood out to me in a big way and to many others that really solidified him as the number one overall pick. Of course, coming into this cycle, my way too early 2025 NBA mock draft, which came out the day after the 2024 draft was concluded, had Cooper Flagg going first overall. I was not really shocked by too much of what I saw this season, but he really has cemented himself as a build-around go-to prospect. And I think for the Mavericks specifically, getting that here is so tremendous. I'm going to show you a quick graph of Cooper Flagg's impact defensively. He had the best individual defensive rating among 35 of the top college prospects in this year's class. And Flagg, not only will he be an instrumental piece into Dallas's defense where he can be valuable guarding the basketball out on the perimeter, can switch across multiple different matchups night in, night out, which I think will be very valuable for Dallas. But he can also have significant impact in the gaps. He can play as a helper around the rim. He's very impactful as a roamer, has very great defensive range. I think that's one of the most underrated elements to his game. He is so rangy as a prospect, both on and off the basketball, whether it's his recovery tools to get back into plays once he's beat, or just as a helper where he's flying around, making things happen, cleaning up a lot of rotations for Duke this past year. And for Dallas, when you already have so much length and size behind him with Anthony Davis, Daniel Gafford, Derik Lively, I think Flagg's recovery tools and instincts will play a big factor in Dallas having an elite team defense very, very quickly into his NBA career, which is very atypical for a rookie. It's hard to win in the NBA with young players, especially rookies. I think Dallas will be the outlier to that this year because Flagg is more than ready to be an impactful contributor on both ends of the floor. Of course, his defense has been the highlight of what I've mentioned so far, but offensively, he's taken significant strides forward in his game as well. He's just a very, very sound two-way prospect, one who is going to be able to handle the ball, can function as a short roll guy. I honestly think, like, if you're looking at comparisons, he's a blend between Paolo Banchero, Jason Tatum. He's like a souped-up version of Jalen Johnson. This is a star player, and this is a guy who, for Dallas Mavericks fans, listen, he might not be Luka Doncic, he might not have all the 30-point triple-doubles, but this guy's going to be an impactful, big-time winner, and the Mavericks are extremely, extremely lucky to have the opportunity here to add him to their franchise and begin winning with him immediately after draft day on my birthday this year. Pick number 2, the San Antonio Spurs here, of course. Dallas stole the show at the NBA Draft Lottery on May 12th, but more than a month, almost a month later now at this point, I am still very, very pleasantly surprised for the Spurs to have moved up all the way up to number 2, and for a team that already has such a strong infrastructure in place. You look at De'Aaron Fox, who they traded for in a pretty good deal for them, all things considered, the amount of assets they had to give up in that deal. Only really 2 first-round picks and 5 second-rounders to bring Fox to San Antonio. They had a lot of leverage going into that deal. They have Stephon Castle, the reigning Rookie of the Year. They have the Rookie of the Year from the year prior, of course, with Victor Wembanyama, who projects to be a top 5 player in the world as soon as next season. San Antonio is really in the driver's seat for the destiny and control and direction of their future moving forward. They have Hawks picks to work with, and now second overall, they get to add in another elite prospect in Dylan Harper out of Rutgers. This is a player who I think, even for those who have him, in the top 5, maybe not at number 2, I think they are underrating some of his star qualities a little bit. I think specifically his handle, ability to get down to certain spots on the floor pretty easily. Of course, he's a very large guard, standing at 6'5". I think he's become a little underrated throughout this process, even though most people are projecting him to be the second overall pick. A lot of people are overlooking his actual value and impact, and I know he was a part of an unsuccessful team context at Rutgers, but I really don't think a lot of that should fall on his shoulders. I think the process, when you go through his actual film and watch what he was able to do and what he created for that team, the process when he had the ball in his hands was actually very, very good, and he was quite impactful in the opportunities when he was off the ball. He didn't have a lot of talent around him. Ace Bailey didn't amplify that talent around him at all, and actually Ace Bailey had a pretty unsuccessful season individually. And while there was 2 5-star freshmen there at Rutgers, only one of them played like a 5-star freshman, and that was Dylan Harper. He was far and away Rutgers' best player this past season, and for San Antonio specifically, getting him here second overall, this is in addition into your ball handling, this is an addition into your playmaking, this is an addition into your guard rotation, and if anything has been proven in this NBA playoffs, it is the value of having more than one creator, having more than one go-to player who can generate offense consistently time after time after time. For Indiana, it's been Halliburton, Siakam, Nembhard, TJ McConnell even to an extent. Then for the Thunder, of course, it's the two-headed snake at the top with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams. But then they have other guys who can attack closeouts, drive the basketball, be connective as passers. You think about Hartenstein's value as a DHO hub and a playmaking big. Playmaking wins in the NBA. The more connectivity you have, the more passing, the more skill you actually have on the basketball, the better. And when there are players who can make reads with a live handle and you can build a read and react offense, you become nearly unguardable. And I think for San Antonio specifically, having Dylan Harper, adding him into a core that already has some good pull-up jump shooting in De'Aaron Fox, an elite big man in Victor Wembanyama, and still the 14th overall pick in this mock draft yet to work with too, and another high second-round pick, which we won't cover in today's video, but is an asset yet for the Spurs to use. San Antonio can get a whole lot better this offseason just through the draft, and then they have other flexibility, other ways to improve as well. So if you're a Spurs fan, you got to be over the moon right now. I think Dylan Harper is a tremendous fit here for the Spurs and makes them a whole lot better going into next season. Moving on to pick number 3, the Philadelphia 76ers here now. And I think the Sixers are such an interesting kind of dilemma to talk through, of course, with the desire to try and win now. You don't think about Daryl Morey making a ton of top selections. That's not really been his MO as a guy in the front office, as a lead executive. But here the Sixers are. Tanked to end the season, got rewarded through the lottery with the 3rd overall pick. And I have kind of settled on the way that I think Philadelphia will go if they retain this pick, and that is 3rd overall. I have them selecting /wing Ace Bailey out of Rutgers. So back-to-back Scarlet Knights go off the board here, number 2 and 3 respectively, as Harper and Bailey come off the board in that order. And for the 76ers, it is a little bit of a tricky dilemma because you look at someone like VJ Edgecombe, who could be very applicable into their team defense with his creation rate, high steal percentage, high block percentage for a guard. But at the end of the day, this team probably just needs more length, and they still do need that athletic juice. Of course, Edgecombe would give that to them. But Bailey is a bigger, longer athlete, someone who can definitely jump out of the gym. Very good functional athleticism. You see it in his rebounding rate, where he got on the offensive glass quite a bit for Rutgers this past season. And while I just said it a couple minutes ago talking about Harper, Bailey did not have a good freshman season. He did not have a 5-star freshman caliber of season for them. He was still impactful at times and showed a lot of flashes for his skill. Now, I do think under Nick Nurse, there's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be moments where he gets yanked out of the game because he messes up a defensive rotation or gets caught ball watching. There's going to be some issues along the way, and that is standard for a young player like Ace Bailey. Coming into the draft, he'll still be 18 on draft night, so this is a very young prospect, one who has a lot of room to grow yet, a lot of time to mature, develop his game, and I think with the real increase over time of usage and development, and I think the value of time in his development is going to be super important. It makes it a little bit tricky in the Sixers' immediate timeline. Can Ace Bailey be a current contributor to winning? The answer to that might not be yes for a while, but for the Sixers in general, I do think you have to look at the long-term direction of this organization. They clearly regret the Paul George contract at this point in time. Joel Embiid just cannot stay healthy, so while it might be an attractive idea to look at win-now options and explore trading this pick, explore X, Y, and Z for the immediate team, I think taking the long-term patient approach is the more likely outcome for Philadelphia, all things considered, and the Sixers here at number 3 do end up taking Ace Bailey. Which now brings us to the Charlotte Hornets, 4th overall, and the top 4 I think has been very clearly defined for me in the last 3 or 4 mock drafts I've done here on the channel. 4th overall, no surprises here. The Charlotte Hornets select guard VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor. And I think Edgecombe specifically for Charlotte gives them some real defensive juice that they badly need. I've talked about it at length in my previous mock drafts. Edgecombe is not a perfectly defined defensive player at this point in time. There are, of course, those defensive lapses that you associate with young players, and this is what I talked about when I mentioned Flagg at number 1 and how he's the unique prospect who can contribute to winning immediately as a rookie. It's hard to ask rookies to contribute to winning in such a big way, especially on the defensive end of the floor, and I think Charlotte, while they're going to be taxing Edgecombe with a lot defensively here immediately, he's probably not ready to turn this defense around. They still had a, I think, rather pedestrian defensive season under Charles Lee in his first year as head coach. Now, given their defensive talent, I thought he did quite a good job getting them to where they were across the league, but there's still evidently room for improvement here. And Edgecombe, again, his defensive event creation rate, I think, is the biggest headliner for him. I think it points to all of his athletic tools and how he functionally applies those on the defensive end of the floor, whether it's rotating, in getting into the passing lanes, playing as a helper on gaps and drives, cutting off ball handlers when he's actually guarding out on the basketball, and then as a low man rotating over, you see him flying around in transition, getting chased down blocks here and there. That's where some of the value is really going to lie for Charlotte right now at this point. Defensively, Edgecombe's going to make stuff happen defensively, which I think will help the Hornets get out in transition a little bit more, maybe simplify their offense in transition a bit with more opportunities. And then Edgecombe offensively gives them something that they really don't have right now either, which is that downhill force, the desire to get to the rim and into traffic. That's something I really love about Edgecombe's game in comparison to Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, the 2 cornerstones at this point in time for the Hornets offense. Those 2 guys are pretty contact averse. They try and avoid playing into physicality, and Edgecombe kind of seeks it. Kind of feels like a little bit of a heat-seeking missile going downhill. Not quite to the extent that someone like Russell Westbrook was, but definitely a player who is accustomed to playing into the chest of rim protectors, playing into physicality, playing into that contact. And I think for the Hornets, that should help them get to the line a little bit more often. And if Edgecombe can put together a lot of the other kind of question mark swing skills in his game right now, the pull-up jump shooting, the handle, the ability to win in isolation more frequently, those are the big ifs right now for him. But if he puts all of that together, he can be a very, very impactful player and one that checks a lot of the boxes that Charlotte is currently lacking on their roster at this point in time. Moving on to pick number 5, we're here with the Utah Jazz now. Of course, moved down from the best odds in the draft down to number 5, but they're still in a spot after the clearly defined top 4 in this draft in terms of mock drafts are now off the board. Utah has kind of the opportunity to restart the draft in a way, and with a variety of different players available, this becomes one of my favorite mock numbers in the entire draft because there's so many directions Utah could look to go. They could go safe, try and play it long term for if they find a 1A player in next year's draft, if they get a top 2, top 3 pick next year in a very loaded 2026 draft class, or do they try and make that aggressive swing right now and try and accelerate their rebuild, whether it's via trade or drafting a guy who they think could be the face of the franchise moving forward. 5th overall, I do have the Utah Jazz here selecting guard Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma. This is a player who has a Hall of Fame name. I mean, the last name Fears is just iconic as a guard. That's a sweet name, but really the scouting goes a lot deeper than that, of course. He is a very, very talented ball handler. When you actually turn on the tape, watch this kid play, Feels like he can get downhill with ease. He's very shifty, changes pace and direction extremely well. And this is a player who reclassified up as well. I talked about that with Cooper Flagg, accelerating his pathway to the NBA. Jeremiah Fears did the exact same thing, reclassified a year early, was supposed to be in the 2026 draft class, moved his name up into the 2025 NBA draft class by attending college a year early, and now has solidified himself at this point as a very likely top 10 pick in this year's class because of his dynamism with the ball in his hands, the comfortability that teams seem to view with him, handling the basketball, making reads in the pick and roll, and a lot of shooting potential. He shot the ball extremely well at the combine. I thought that was a very, very good measure for him in solidifying his draft stock in front of several league executives. You just think about what his main struggles were at Oklahoma. It was really the scoring efficiency. Shot only 28% on threes. He got to the rim a lot, shot a lot of twos, a decent three-point attempt rate, but at the end of the day for Utah, what you're trying to get here is that build around go-to guard. Something they haven't had since they traded away Donovan Mitchell. And Jazz fans, I kind of want to know what you're thinking about the rebuild in general. Leave a comment down below because the Jazz were winning so many games. Of course, they were never really able to get over that hump. They didn't get where they wanted to go with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. But those two guys were uplifting that franchise for a very, very long time. And the Jazz were really relevant in the Western Conference for quite a while. And post Stockton and Malone, they haven't been the most relevant team consistently. They had stretches with Darren Williams, Andre Karolinko. There's been some really solid players in Utah for sure. So I don't want to undersell what the Jazz have accomplished for the last 25 years. But now at this point in time, it feels like they're kind of stuck in a weird spot. They haven't been drafting in the top 3 yet. They haven't been blessed by that lottery luck. So, Jazz fans, I want to know what you think about the direction of your rebuild. How do you feel about how things are going at this point in time? Moving on to pick 6, the Washington Wizards, another team where after Jeremiah Fears goes off the board at 5, I think the Wizards become a really fascinating spot. Of course, one of my favorite outcomes would be for them to draft Derik Queen, a player who I have very high on my own individual big board, but Washington specifically, I'm not sure that they're going to go that route. They've drafted predominantly defensive-minded players. You look at Bilal Coulibaly when they drafted him out of Mets 92, Victor Wembanyama's former teammate in the L&B Pro A League over there in France. You also look at Alex Sarr, who they drafted, another French prospect who is playing in the NBL from the Perth Wildcats. They have drafted internationally quite a bit, but I don't think they're going to go that route here, especially with where the strength of this draft class is, especially from the college route at this point with who's available. 6th overall here, I have the Washington Wizards selecting Trey Johnson out of Texas, someone who the defensive tape is a little rough right now at this point in time for him, but the offensive game is definitely skilled. He has the ability to put the basketball in the hoop. Shot the ball very, very well from 3 this past season. Significant volume, both off the catch and off the dribble. And I think if you're Washington, right now, what they drafted last year, Bub Carrington, someone who can be a pull-up jump shooter for them, someone who I think long-term they're really banking on that continued development as a ball handler, go-to scorer. For me, coming out in his draft class, I had compared him a little bit to a DeJounte Murray in terms of the shot diet, the play style, the longer arms. Bub Carrington has some very positive characteristics, but I do think they just need more scoring juice in general long-term, and Trey Johnson can definitely give you that. There are some concerns here, though, from the overall shot diet. First of all, he doesn't get to the rim a lot. That is indicated by his slightly lower free throw rate than what you would hope to see from a star scoring type, and a kind of inefficient play style when it comes to his two-point volume. A lot of two-point shots, but a lot of them are pull-up mid-range jump shots. And while that's not a terrible thing, and we see the MVP of the league, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, completely dominating defenses there, the mid-range shot can be a good shot. The question for Trey Johnson is, can he make it efficient enough for it to be a good shot for him specifically and for his team? He shot sub 45% on twos this past season for Texas. Now, again, he was a very young player in the SEC, kind of leading the offense and kind of controlling things for Texas. So was he a little overtaxed maybe? Yes. In Washington, do they have the team defense context around him to protect him on that end of the floor? Probably going forward. Do they have other pieces who can maybe alleviate some of the pressure for him as a scorer as well? I do think so long term. Trey Johnson's that upside swing here, someone who I've continuously compared to Tyler Hero. I think the shot diet's going to look very comparable. Going to get to that floater more than all the way to the rim, just like what Tyler Hero does. And Hero's development on that float shot has been really instrumental in him making his first All-Star game. And I think that will be one of the key components to watch for with Trey Johnson moving forward. The development of his touch, the development of his floater, and specifically if he can get that pull-up jump shot in the mid-range area to be as good as gold for him moving forward. Now on to pick number 7, where we have the New Orleans Pelicans here. And at this spot with New Orleans, looking to add to their roster, of course, we've been fairly guard-centric in past mock drafts. I think Kasparas Jakucionis was a pick a few weeks ago. Then last week we talked about Jeremiah Fears, but with Fears off the board, I wanted to go a different route. The Pelicans did draft Yves Missi last year. I thought he had a really strong rookie season, especially for his draft slot. And now 7th overall, the Pelicans are going to continue valuing center play. One of my biggest things that I rave about continuously here on the channel is the value of 48 minutes of good center play. The Pelicans have an opportunity to draft an impactful center, a real big man who can shut down the rim, screen and roll, and is accustomed to playing off the top of the key and delay action and off of handoffs. 7th overall here, the New Orleans Pelicans select Khaman Maluach out of Duke. And this kid is huge. He is massive, and he is a living testament that size still matters. Had an incredulous 53.0 net rating for Duke this past season in 39 games. That means across 39 games, his team, when he was on the court, was outscoring opponents by 53 points per 100 possessions. That is ridiculous. And for the Pelicans specifically, getting an impact monster like Khaman Maluach to play 23 to 26 minutes a night, share the minutes fairly evenly with Yves Missi, it allows them to play really aggressively defensively. They can go after blocks. They can try and impact at the rim as much as possible, because if they get into foul trouble, well, guess what? The other one just gets back up off the bench and comes back into the game for them. And I think that's going to be a real positive here for New Orleans on nights where one of the two of them is out with an injury, or, throughout the course of 82 games, players are destined to miss games. So if Maluach is out, Missi can take more of that center load. If Missi's out, Maluach can play a few more minutes and kind of cover that absence a bit more. And I think, again, 48 minutes of good center play when they're both available, it will be a differentiating factor for New Orleans compared to past iterations of this team where they're playing, this is a big throwback, but guys like Omer Asik. Like, this is not a sustainable way of winning in the NBA. Skilled size, rim gravity, rim presence, rim deterrence, rim protection, all of that stuff is instrumental in winning, and it all comes down to forcing opponents into suboptimal shots. And I think Khaman Maluach can have that impact while offensively creating a ton of space with his screen setting, catching lobs at the rim, and just being a very impactful offensive player by getting back on the glass and doing a lot of the little things that contribute to winning in a big way in today's game. At pick number 8, we have the Brooklyn Nets. And Brooklyn, this is their first of 4 draft picks. I would be pretty shocked if we don't see them make some kind of trade on draft night. I definitely think that they could be targeting Houston's pick at number 10 as an example. I don't have trades in this mock draft, but I wanted to mention that as a possibility. 8th overall here, though, I do have the Brooklyn Nets selecting wing Knueppel out of Duke. This is a player who is going to be completely undervalued by many in this draft cycle. He's going to get labeled as quote-unquote just a shooter. Some people will be upset when their team drafts him, but they will be dead wrong. This is a player who is a 16-game player. He will be extremely beneficial to have on your roster come playoff time. Now, the Nets might not be there for a couple of years, but this is a really strong cornerstone piece for the Brooklyn Nets moving forward. If you look at Jordi Fernandez and the amount of success that quality pieces have had on his roster, I'm talking about Dennis Schroeder, I'm talking about Cam Johnson, I'm talking about Dorian Finney-Smith, guys who are skilled-oriented players who fit roles. Those guys have been extremely impactful and productive for Jordi Fernandez from his first year coaching there in Brooklyn. Now you give him a supersized version of that, super skilled version of that in Knueppel, someone who's an absolute laser from behind the three-point line and really productive on his drives as well. Shot the two-pointer quite well this season. A lot more efficient than Trey Johnson in the middle of the floor. Plays off of 2 feet better. He's going to be very turnover averse. Gets to the line, I think, adequately well for his play style archetype. And for Brooklyn specifically, while yes, this isn't the sexy pick, this isn't the pick that people are going to go, oh my gosh, yes, my team took Knueppel. I think the smart fans, the analytic-based minds, are going to look at this and say, this is a home run pick for Brooklyn at number 8. This is a guy who, yeah, maybe he's not a 25-point per game scorer for us. Maybe he's not the face of the franchise, but this is a really darn good player who's going to help us win games both right now, starting immediately, and also moving down the road when we start to put other top-end talent around him. This is a guy who's going to fit like a glove, can play in a variety of different play styles, whether it's on the ball a little bit, off the ball predominantly, playing off of wide pin action, staggers, ghost screens, whatever you want him to do, he's going to do it, and he's going to do it pretty well. He attacks closeouts, drives the ball effectively. This is just a great, great selection for Brooklyn at number 8, and one that you really can't go wrong with if you walk away on draft night with Knueppel in your pocket. Number 9, we have the Toronto Raptors, and Toronto has been one of my favorite Khaman Maluach spots, but with Maluach off the board, it puts Toronto in kind of a tricky spot for a team that has been pretty focused on building up a very strong team defense, especially down the stretch of the season. We saw a lot of that look very, very good for them the final 25, 30 games of the season. Of course, there were a few outliers in there, but Toronto had a strong defensive season to close the year especially, and now 9th overall with Brandon Ingram slated to be a big contributor for them offensively next year. The Raptors can come out here and look to continue building up that defense because they've already added a bit of scoring punch from the previous trade deadline. 9th overall, the Raptors here select forward Carter Bryant out of Arizona, one of the most promising defensive prospects in this year's draft, and it is really predicated from a lot of his physical, athletic tools. So much of defense stems from athletic gifts, effort, and technique. Those 3 things really triangulate to building a good defensive player, and Carter Bryant has a lot of those traits already in place. I think a fairly technically sound player. Now, I think his screen navigation could tick up a little bit. I think his footwork in terms of getting closer to the ball handler, shuffling over the top of screens, chasing over, I think can improve a bit. But specifically what you're looking at is a guy who puts in a lot of effort defensively. He's a lower usage offensive player, which I think would fit smoothly into what Toronto's offensive context already looks like with Barnes and Ingram and Quickly and Barrett. They're not looking for another guy who's looking to dribble, pass, and shoot a whole bunch. They're looking for a guy who can be an effective play finisher, which is what Carter Bryant is. Shot over 70% at the rim in the half court this past year for Arizona, which was an extremely efficient number, especially compared to other wings in this year's draft class. Carter Bryant's got a huge physical frame. He's one of the most athletic players in this draft. I think if you look at his rim percentage number, which we just talked about, that 70+% number, that's where you see some of his athleticism on display on the offensive end. And then defensively, like, he's got a big, strong frame to him. He looks like an NBA forward. And I think on day 1 of his career, even though he's still got a lot of room to grow and develop on both ends of the court, this is a guy who I think has the ability to get on the floor right away because he's NBA ready with his frame. You compare that to someone like Noah Essengue, who is a lot lighter, a lot slimmer, maybe more fluid athletically, but a player, and he's longer for sure than Carter Bryant. But Essengue, what he doesn't have that Bryant has is a filled out frame and the ability to bump and play into traffic, play into contact, and really disrupt guys by riding hips a little bit more effectively with his physicality. And I think for Toronto here, the reason you're drafting Carter Bryant at number 9 is because you're a big time believer in his physical gifts, tools, defensive impact long-term in his NBA career, and then the reliability as an off-the-catch player. Shot over 37% from 3 this past season as a true freshman, was really impactful off the ball in a low-usage, small minutes kind of sample. And I think for Toronto moving forward, there's a lot to love. There's a lot of optimism here. Carter Bryant can definitely be an impact guy for them very quickly into his career. At pick number 10, the Houston Rockets project to be a fairly active team this offseason. Of course, they have been very heavily centered in trade rumors, whether it's with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo. There was speculation last trade deadline that they would have been in on De'Aaron Fox. We'll see if any of those trades actually ever materialize or not for Houston. Of course, they had a very strong season, came up short in the first round of the playoffs in what was a harsh matchup for them, in my opinion, against the Golden State Warriors at the hands of Steph Curry. I mean, he has just owned this franchise, unfortunately. You know, I've had a lot of investment in Houston Rockets basketball. I really like the 2018 team. I cheered a lot for James Harden in his tenure there. So trust me, Rockets fans, I'm not saying that out of spite. I'm saying that out of how I feel it too. And Steph Curry is like the scariest man in all of Houston. But the Rockets at number 10, they have the ability, if they don't trade this pick, to come out and improve their roster. And I think specifically, if you're looking at the long-term direction of this team, while they did draft Reed Sheppard last year, I think more playmaking and more three-point shooting is really the direction you're going to look to go. 10th overall, I have the Houston Rockets selecting guard Kasparas Jakucionis out of Illinois. Remember, Fred VanVleet has a team option. They decided to push back the decision date on that in order to give the Rockets and VanVleet a little bit more time to figure out their futures, whether it be together or separate from each other. That really helps the Rockets with their trade flexibility. Now VanVleet could be a tradable contract. They could decide to decline that team option if they have something else lined up. Definitely a creative outcome for Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone there for Houston to figure out their future. But if they do end up picking, even if they keep Fred VanVleet around, I do think that backcourt still could use a little bit more juice, a little bit more playmaking especially. And Jakucionis is a guy who I think would be a really tremendous fit off of Alperen Şengün. Over half of Jakucionis' field goal attempts this past season came from three. A lot of them come from the step back variety with him having the ball in his hands. The success rate, made only about 34% of his threes or so. He wasn't the most successful three-point shooter in college, but he was a guy who I thought a lot of those attempts came off of some difficulty with him having the ball in his hands. And I think for Houston, if you scale down that kind of usage and that difficulty just a little bit, have him playing off the catch a little bit more off of Şengün, have him playing off the catch off of Amen Thompson a little bit, off of Reed Sheppard a little bit, the Rockets can maximize Jakucionis' off-ball impact a little bit more than Illinois ever could. I just thought the Fighting Illini didn't have a lot of dynamism with the ball in their hands around Jakucionis, which kind of limited his off-ball game a little bit. And I think Houston has the arsenal to maximize Jakucionis a bit more than we ever saw Illinois do there in his lone season of college basketball. At 11, we have the Portland Trailblazers, a team that I think is very fascinating this offseason and somewhat of a difficult team to mock for. Of course, there is a huge investment in Scoot Henderson. They're still trying to usher in further development for him, as they should. I'm still a believer in Scoot Henderson. I'm holding on to that stock until the day I die at this point. I think Blazers fans, you should as well. I've had the luxury of watching him in person a few times. I still think he moves the way that I evaluated coming out of G League Ignite. He moves different than most other guards in the league. He's got good change of direction tools. And now Portland, they're looking about putting pieces around him, around Donovan Clingan, around Toumani Camara. They've built a very strong defensive infrastructure already. Clingan, of course, had an incredible block rate, was one of the most impactful rookies when he was actually on the court. Somehow didn't garner nearly as much love in the Rookie of the Year voting and all rookie team voting that I thought he should have. 11th overall, Portland has the chance to add to this team, and I have them selecting forward/center Derik Queen out of Maryland. Specifically, what Queen brings to Portland that I love so much is another playmaking hub big man. DeAndre Ayton is going into the final year of his contract, and if I'm Portland, I am not looking to keep Ayton long term. I'm looking to give Clingan the keys to the center spot long term and to put pieces around him that maximize his game. And I think Queen, with his short roll playmaking, his ability to play out of the middle of the floor, connect, and do a whole bunch of really nice things with the ball in his hands, one of the most coordinated bigs in recent memory. This is a guy who gets to the free throw line, can utilize dunker spot sitters. He played with Julian Reese at Maryland, and Julian Reese didn't stretch the floor at all. So playing with Clingan, I think, would be pretty easy money for Queen. You'd have another really good rim protector behind him to protect some of Queen's defensive deficiencies. You get to play bigger, which has been a cheat code in the NBA as of late. You think about Cleveland with Mobley and Allen. You think about Minnesota with Towns and Gobert, and then this past year, Randall and Gobert. You think about Nikola Jokic, how much of a presence he is. OKC with Hartenstein and Holmgren. Bigs are impactful, bigs win. And if Portland finds a way to add Derik Queen into their roster alongside Donovan Clingan, I think those two guys are a very fun fit together. You have 45 action to work with. Clingan's passing can be really valuable. You get high lows with him and Queen. I just think there's a lot of juice, and the Blazers have the wing defenders already to kind of support and insulate Queen as well, with Toumani Camara being one of the main headliners there, of course. Really great defender individually. His ascension from where he was as a Dayton Flyer a few years ago to where he is now is just incredible. And I think Portland, all things considered, walking out with Derik Queen in this draft class would be really, really good for them. And I think such an underrated pull at number 11 in this year's draft. Pick 12, the Chicago Bulls here now. In my last mock draft, mocked Derik Queen to them there. 12 is an interesting spot for them, and there are some reports right now about a certain prospect that Chicago would be interested in. While I don't necessarily love the fit and feel like it's a little redundant with a player they just traded for last offseason, I do think there is some validity to those reports. 12th overall, I have the Chicago Bulls here selecting Egor Demin out of BYU. Yes, I think this is a bit redundant with Josh Giddey, both of them very high leverage passers where they are a little turnover prone, but if the ball gets through, that's turning into an assist opportunity 9 times out of 10. And I think for Chicago specifically, while they have Kobe White and Giddey already in place, maybe this can help protect Egor Demin from having to be on the basketball too much early in his career. Last year, the Bulls drafted Matas Buzelis, another guy who can handle the ball a bit, has a very unique collection of gathers, both high and low gathers that help him get to the rim. And I think there's a lot of young pieces in place here to kind of help Egor Demin early in his career adjust to the NBA, adjust to better point of attack defense. One of my biggest concerns with him right now is his ability and comfortability with the ball in his hands. He picks up the ball a lot early. Talking about 30 feet away from the hoop where he's picking up his dribble because he doesn't trust his handle. And a defender gets low and underneath of him a little bit, and he's not comfortable handling with that kind of ball pressure. It's one of the big reasons why I don't think he's a point guard. He's extremely screen reliant. He needs to improve his handle a lot to ever be a true guard in the NBA. But I think if you use him as a forward, have him screen and dive, play out a short roll, play in transition a lot, that's where you can maximize a lot of his passing skill set. And I do think, again, very high three-point attempt rate, very comparable to Jakucionis, where a lot of those were off the dribble and kind of stem from not being able to get downhill as much as you would want a guard prospect to. If you kind of shift his shot diet from off the dribble three-pointers to catch and shoot three-pointers, playing off of Giddey, playing off of Kobe White, maybe that actual success rate, maybe his three-point percentage climbs a bit. And that's where you maybe find a little bit more value. For me, I don't have Egor Demin in my top 20 right now on my big board. I am pretty hesitant with his overall skill set. While I love the passing vision, the passing tools, and specifically one thing I've talked about consistently is that velocity on his passes, which is very sharp, crisp, and timely. The Bulls still, I don't love this fit for them, but when there's smoke, there's sometimes fire, and I wanted to address those rumors in today's mock draft quite a bit. 13, the Atlanta Hawks, one of their 2 first-round picks this year, of course. They own this one through the Sacramento Kings, which was the trade for Kevin Huerter, a trade that I did not like for Sacramento too much when it happened, and I think I'm pretty justified in that now at this point in time. But 13th overall, the Hawks, I think looking for a variety of things onto their roster, some playmaking, more rim protection, more length, more defense, more size, and more play finishing. And that's one of the things that they continue to add around Trae Young. And I do think they're building a pretty competent roster around him. Jalen Johnson, of course, I think took a pretty significant star jump this past year. Dyson Daniels won Most Improved Player of the Year. I thought that was a pretty well-deserved award for him. Atlanta's in a spot now where they have a lot of really strong pieces that fit off of Trae Young. This is an opportunity to make their defense a little bit stronger and find another guy who fits off of that play style. 13th overall here of the Atlanta Hawks selecting forward Noah Essengue out of Ratio Farm Ulm. I think specifically what Essengue is going to provide for them is a rangy, mobile gap filler defensively. Someone who can get up in the passing lanes, can be a havoc wreaker alongside Dyson Daniels, one of the best havoc wreakers in basketball history. Daniels just makes stuff happen defensively, and Essengue can be another guy who just kind of takes away some of those angles. When you have really long, fluid athletes like this, it just kind of changes the geometry on the court. And for the Hawks specifically, a team that right now there's questions about their backup center spot. Of course, they have a smaller big in Nique Kongwu. Getting this big, rangy, long athlete could help kind of solidify that. They drafted a longer forward last year in Zachary Sachet. This Hawks team is getting a lot more athletic, a lot longer, and they're very fluid defensively. And I think for a Quinn Snyder coach team, when there's so much offensive creativity in his playbook, and when you have Trae Young, who's a very evident floor raiser for a team's offense, filling out this roster with more defensive-minded pieces fits really well. And then Essengue, one thing he does really well is cut and play off the catch, drive closeouts. And you're going to get those things when you're playing with Trae Young because of the attention he draws and how teams blitz him. And I think this is a really good fit off of Jalen Johnson as well. And it gives the Hawks a pretty strong infrastructure moving forward. And he fits in like a glove to what they need. They need more guys who can play off the catch. They need more guys who are athletic, mobile, There are questions I have about his play strength. There's questions I have about his creativity. Not really much in the form of self-creation. I really don't think there's much star upside here, like other people seem to think. But I do think he's a very, very solid athlete and a guy who's going to have an impact here playing for a team like Atlanta. And I think Trae Young really simplifies his offensive responsibilities as well. At 14, we're back to the San Antonio Spurs. Remember, second overall in this mock draft, they selected Dylan Harper, the almost foregone conclusion on who will be the second pick on draft night. But now 14th overall, this pick coming from Atlanta, the team we just got done talking about. The Spurs, who could trade this pick. Last year they had 2 picks in the top 10, decided to trade pick number 8. At 14, they have the opportunity to strike here on another prospect who can really help their offense and has long physical gifts to help their defense. 14th overall, I have the San Antonio Spurs selecting Cedric Coward out of Washington State, perhaps the biggest riser in the twilight of this draft cycle as we get closer and closer to the actual date of the NBA draft. More and more buzz, more and more noise continues to pick up on Cedric Coward as a prospect. Of course, kept his name in the 2025 NBA draft. And after just playing 6 games for Washington State, there was a lot of questions when he decided to transfer to Duke. It seemed like that was going to be the foregone conclusion for his next stop, was playing college basketball for the Duke Blue Devils, where he was going to be super impactful. I thought he was going to have a really great season off of Cam Boozer there. Ultimately, never happened. He's going to the draft, and part of the reason I think he and his team decided that was because there was enough buzz and enough interest in the top 20 for him to feel really comfortable staying in the draft. Last week, I had him mocked at number 15 to Oklahoma City. This week, he moves up a spot into the lottery for the first time in all of my mock drafts to San Antonio at 14. This is a guy who can really shoot the ball, shot over 70% on twos in his very tiny 6-game sample size for Washington State. The play finishing tools are there, catches and shoots extremely well. And then with that 7'2" wingspan, I think there's some real defensive impact for him to unlock and uncover yet with his overall size. About a 6'6", 6'7" wing. This is a standard-sized NBA wing, a guy who can definitely have an impact there. This gives the Spurs a little bit of contract flexibility, whether it's Keldon Johnson potentially on the way out, maybe Devin Vassell even in a trade. Getting this kind of player gives San Antonio the option to move off of other contracts if they want to. Now, is Coward going to be better than Vassell long-term? I'm not certain about that, but I do think there's definite value here for the Spurs to utilize with Cedric Coward. And I think he's a guy who can definitely fit into their rotation long-term and really leave a positive impact on winning ways there in San Antonio. Outside of the lottery now, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder at pick number 15. This is an interesting spot for them. You know, last year they drafted Nikola Topic. This is a team that hasn't always targeted three-point shooting, even when I think that they need it or could use it. The Thunder are obviously so well built. I'm not really criticizing their roster by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think one of the things they are lacking is just this like go-to movement shooter. They do have Isaiah Joe, but I'm talking even quicker trigger than that. Could they target something like that here at 15? I don't know if this draft class at this spot in the draft is really the place to do so. So instead, we're going to go with this kind of polarizing prospect here instead. 15th overall, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting forward Collin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina. This is probably not the ideal fit to many. And there's going to be some Thunder fans saying, Collin Murray-Boyles doesn't fit our team, this, that, and the other thing. What I'm telling you right now, though, is this is another guy who gets after it defensively. And I think that fits anywhere, but especially in OKC for a team that predicates itself on defensive intensity, effort, flying all over the court. Collin Murray-Boyles can fill a litany of roles for a team defense, whether it's closing out onto shooters, defending out on the perimeter a bit, defending bigs as a smaller forward himself at 6'7" with a significant plus wingspan, or just flat out protecting the rim as a shot blocker, a guy who has very similar moments to Draymond Green. Now, doing it in the SEC and doing it in the NBA are two different things. I think Collin Murray-Boyles does have some shortcomings in comparison to someone like Draymond. If he was really the second coming of Draymond Green, he'd probably be number 2 or 3 on my board this year. I don't think he's that caliber of prospect, but there's a lot of intangibles to work with. He's a very high IQ player, a multi-effort player, and for the Thunder, when you don't really need a lot, this is a guy who you give 10 minutes a night, he's going to have an impact. Give him 15 minutes a night, he's going to have an even bigger impact. And I think for OKC, they've found a lot of success playing guys who are effort pieces, effort contributors. Kenrich Williams, I think, is a great example of that, has been a real staple for their rotation and lineup and roster over the last 3-4 years. Thunder fans love Kenrich Williams. I think over time, Thunder fans would come to love Collin Murray-Boyles. While yes, he does have some offensive limitations, doesn't shoot the ball extremely well, very low volume three-point shooter in general, I do think playing off of Chet Holmgren, playing off of Isaiah Hartenstein, gives him enough functionality as a cutter and connector piece where Mark Daigneault, who's one of the most creative coaches in the league, can find ways to utilize this guy offensively, and the defensive impact is too good to pass up on here in this mock draft for OKC at number 15. Pick 16, the Orlando Magic have two selections in this draft, one at 16 and one at 25. And for Orlando, I continue to go back and forth. I like the idea of them drafting a center, getting a guy here at 16 who could get on the glass. You know, we've talked about Asa Newell. We've talked about Joan Behringer for them in these spots. But I also love the idea of getting shot creation. And I still continue to think Orlando needs a guard who can shoot the ball at a high rate. And they have the unique opportunity to get a player who I think actually fits off of Banchero and Wagner really well. 16th overall, I have the Orlando Magic selecting guard Jase Richardson out of Michigan State. This is not the first time I have mocked this, but I continue to go back and forth on this because Orlando's draft history doesn't suggest they'll take a 6'2" guard, especially not a 6'2" off-ball guard. So, is this the most realistic pick? Well, it isn't what they've done historically, especially in recent history. It is what they're lacking right now. They need someone who can effectively put the ball on the deck, shoot the ball, create for others, create for himself a little bit, and be functional in a lower usage role offensively. And I think for Orlando specifically, the reason that this is such a good fit, what they already have in place is not one, but two jumbo playmakers. Franz Wagner has taken significant strides forward from where he was when he came out of Michigan. And, of course, Paolo Banchero, former number 1 overall pick, another guy who's going to garner and carry a lot of the offensive weight, whether he's super efficient in that role or not. I think putting someone like Jase Richardson, where the offensive context, the offensive spacing just gets a little bit better with him on the court, I think that significantly improves Orlando. Richardson's very successful playing off the catch, being decisive and quick with his movements and actions in order to best optimize when he has the ball in his hands. And for Orlando at number 16, I think this is a really strong pick. I know, yes, Magic fans are going to say, we're not taking a small guard. I understand that philosophy. I understand the idea behind that, and I understand that historically that's something the Magic have kind of strayed away from doing. At some point, though, they're going to have to realize to win a playoff series, you have to make shots and you have to be able to score. That's something they haven't done very well. I think Jase Richardson's active enough defensively, competitive enough defensively to not be a complete nothing on that end of the court for them, even though he is smaller. And I think his offensive value as a dribble pass shoot prospect is just too good to pass up on here at number 16 for Orlando. 17, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves, of course, a disappointing end to their season, losing in the Western Conference Finals in 5 games for the second consecutive season. But this pick via Detroit, which came through the Karl-Anthony Towns trade with New York, is a really good asset for them. And, you know, we've talked about possibly losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Well, I do think very likely that the replacement is already on the roster in Terrence Shannon Jr. They, of course, drafted Rob Dillingham last year, who slates to be the long-term replacement for Mike Conley. The Wolves have already kind of done a good job building up some of those replacement pieces in-house. The question then is their front court. Julius Randle, player option, very sizable player option. You look at Naz Reid, player option that's going to very likely get declined. How does Minnesota figure out their front court? And then they really don't have a true backup center behind Rudy Gobert, especially if they lose Naz Reid. 17th overall, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting center Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown. Big reminder, Tim Connolly, his first draft in Minnesota, with Karl-Anthony Towns on the roster, what did he do? He drafted Walker Kessler, and then traded Walker Kessler in a deal for Rudy Gobert. He is clearly in the belief system that having 2 big men can be valuable, and having more rim protection, more size, the better. Thomas Sorber measured in tremendously well at the Combine, a 7'6" wingspan, a 9'1" standing reach, and his block rate at Georgetown was incredulous. A 7.6% block rate, really stood out in a big way before he had a season-ending foot injury, which I do think will have a little bit of impact on his draft stock. I do think some teams will be wary about that. At the beginning of his NBA career, his weight was up pretty significantly at the Combine, measured in as the heaviest player at the Combine, which I thought was very interesting at that point. But Sorber, for me, specifically what you're looking at with Minnesota getting is more rim protection, especially in the moments that Gobert's out of the game. And if you're looking at the long-term future post the Gobert era in Minnesota at some point in time, not that that's necessarily coming in the next couple of years or anything, I do think Gobert, as long as Minnesota doesn't make a mistake and trade him for Kevin Durant or something stupid, the Wolves, I still think they have 3 or 4 years with Gobert yet, at least, being a starting caliber center for them. But Sorber could definitely be a guy who fills in 15 to 18 minutes per game, gives you some of that much needed rim protection off the bench, allows you to have 48 minutes of good center play. I talked about that with New Orleans at number 7, how 48 minutes of good center play can be really, really beneficial. And Sorber offensively gives you a little bit of a different juice than Gobert. Gives you some of that rim protection, the shot blocking like Gobert does, but offensively more functional as a short roller, a little bit better playmaking feel. Gobert's gotten a lot better there as well. People are going to point out to some of the terrible clips, and there's a lot of awful moments for sure. But Gobert's definitely developed in last 4 years as a short roller. But Sorber, I think, coming in at his age is much further along than Gobert was as a young prospect. So maybe the upside there is significantly higher as well as a passer. And I think for the Wolves, this becomes an interesting project for them to try and uncover and figure out. And just outside the lottery feels like the right range for where Sorber might go on draft night this year. Pick 18 is the Washington Wizards after going with Trey Johnson at number 6 in this mock draft. The Wizards have a second selection to continue bolstering their roster, improving their team, and specifically, I mentioned earlier, their team defense. This is a chance to put another big framed forward around Alex Sarr and specifically continue building up that defense without jeopardizing your offensive spacing, while someone like Collin Murray-Boyles is an extremely talented forward and does a lot of things really well. He doesn't shoot the ball as well as this prospect, which is why this guy maybe makes a bit more sense for Washington this week. 18th overall, the Wizards selecting forward Rasheer Fleming out of St. Joseph's, the Atlantic 10 prospect for St. Joe's. Sticks in the Metro Atlantic area with Washington, and ultimately DC here is going to be able to put him next to Alex Sarr. This is another really big, long athlete, 6'9" standing height without shoes on, a 7'5" wingspan. This guy is a Goliath as a forward and has some real small ball 5 potential, which gives them maybe 10, 15 minutes a night of backup center play behind Alex Sarr right now. But I think for Washington specifically, if you want to overwhelm other teams, if you want to win with length, size, and defense, the combination of Fleming, Coulibaly, and Sarr all on the floor together is one that's going to be a difficult shell to break defensively because of the length, the help. If Sarr's involved in ball screens, Fleming can be rotating behind him. If Fleming's involved in the ball screen, Sarr will be somewhere lurking as a roamer. It's going to be difficult for team offenses to effectively break and beat this Wizards defense, especially as their players mature, develop, get better at reading scouting reports, and just strengthen up their overall defensive games. They have so many physical gifts and tools right now, and I think as long as they continue blossoming and growing in the way that I expect them to, Rasheer Fleming can be such a nice tie-in piece where kind of just puts the knot on everything, kind of ties together some of their defensive lineups moving forward. And the more length, the more size, the more rim protection, the more perimeter defensive talent you have, the better in this league. And Rasheer Fleming checks a lot of those boxes for the Wizards. And as an older prospect, I think is quite ready to contribute on day one of his NBA career. 19, the Brooklyn Nets with the second of their 4 selections. Remember, at 8, we went with Knueppel for Brooklyn, and now this spot at number 19 becomes a very fascinating opportunity for them to continue adding talent. And they do have some questions about who will be on this roster long-term. Nic Claxton has been in trade rumors. Cam Johnson, of course, in trade rumors. We're going to try and get out ahead of that a little bit, and we're going to draft someone in the front court. 19th overall, I have the Brooklyn Nets selecting center Asa Newell out of Georgia, and I think specifically what he's going to bring to this team is another very mobile screen, dive, play out of DHOs a bit, which I think will be very valuable in Jordi Fernandez's offense. And for Brooklyn specifically, walking away with this selection after going with Knueppel at number 8, you're building pieces into an infrastructure that will be ready for a star player at some point in time. While it might not be right now, you're not maybe getting them this offseason. We'll see what happens in a Giannis trade request or not. Maybe Brooklyn goes that approach, but in an organic rebuild method, the Nets could still be lined up for draft picks next year, put themselves toward the top of the draft next season, hopefully walk out with someone like Darren Peterson, AJ Debonsa, Cam Boozer, and all of a sudden the Brooklyn Nets are cooking with gas if they have this infrastructural foundation around them moving forward. I think Asa Newell can definitely be a contributor to that. I like his touch. Definite defensive mobility. Pretty solid steal and block rates, which is what makes him so unique as a big man. A little bit of defensive versatility to work with and uncover there. So Brooklyn at number 19, I think walking away with Asa Newell, having Knueppel already off the board for them at number 8. It's a really strong start to the draft here in the first round for Brooklyn. 2 more picks yet for them to go as well. 20, we jump into the Miami Heat, a team that I think is really fascinating to talk about. Of course, you think about Heat culture, you think about what this team is missing. There's a lot of struggles right now for Miami, and it's not a very clear path on how to improve things. I do think the combination of Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware moving forward will be an instrumental one for them finding success as early as next season. But 20th overall, I have Miami at this spot, selecting forward Nique Clifford out of Colorado State. I think they are just lacking talent, and Nique Clifford is a player who is extremely well-rounded, did a lot of everything for Colorado State, was really their primary initiator, their primary scorer, their primary go-to guy, was extremely impactful, got on the glass a ton, rebounded the ball very, very well for his position. That productivity, I think, is very essential in kind of showcasing some of his athletic gifts. Reminds me in a lot of ways of Dillon Jones from last year's draft class, but unlike Dillon Jones, measured in a little bit bigger at the combine, and I think just has more functional skills as an actual three-point shooter, translating to the NBA pretty quickly in his career. So for Miami, after trading away Jimmy Butler, they're missing some offensive talent. They're missing some more of that length, creation skills. And Nique Clifford's one of the few forwards who you're going to be able to get in that range of pick number 20 in this year's draft that can actually give you that, supply some of those needs, and fix some of the issues. The Heat still need a point guard. This doesn't address it here at this spot. But I do think Nique Clifford's just a talented player and definitely an upgrade onto their current roster at this point in time. Pick 21 is the Utah Jazz once again. After drafting Jeremiah Fears at pick number 5, the Jazz come in here at number 21 with some significant needs to fill. With this pick, though, I have them selecting forward Liam McNeely out of UConn. And if Jazz fans are upset at me for this selection, I totally understand it. Liam McNeely is not a sexy pick and not a high upside pick, and one that I would be probably not super enthused with either if I was a Jazz fan at 21. Remember, these mock drafts are kind of projecting what I think could happen on draft night, not necessarily what I would do. I do have Liam McNeely a little bit lower on my board than most. This is a very interesting player to talk about. Really good defensive rebounding rate. I think that's one of the most beneficial applications of his athleticism, if you want to call it that. He didn't shoot the 3-ball very well, but he had an okay free throw rate. Now, he shot twos horrendously. Shot, I think, 43% on twos this past season for UConn. And I think, again, that's a testament to how UConn was mishandling him, misutilizing him offensively. The Huskies just had a really bad season. It started with the Invitational tournament that they were a part of, where they just got destroyed. Dan Hurley says they're never going to play in a Invitational tournament again, which is crazy. But, I mean, Liam McNeely did not have a good season. But I do think if you're projecting him playing off of a guy like Jeremiah Fears, playing off of other pieces, McNeely can be more successful in a catch-and-shoot role. Now, I do think he comes with pretty heavy feet, a low steal rate, low block rate. I think presents some of his physical limitations and challenges that he's going to have to try and overcome in his NBA career. There's definite limitations here, and if you're a Jazz fan and not stoked about this pick, I totally get it. But I do think for Utah, a team that could be looking for more shooting. Again, if you go to a multi-year viewpoint of McNeely as a prospect, go back to all the high school tape, a couple years at Montverde Academy, you're going to realize, like, hey, this guy can shoot the ball. I wouldn't be overly worried about some of his numbers at UConn. I do think there's definite concerns with some of them as well, though. I'm not super stoked about this player as a prospect, especially not for Utah at 21, a team that I think needs to get significantly better defensively and doesn't really do so with Fears and McNeely in this draft. But we haven't seen Danny Ainge prioritize drafting defensive-minded players at this point in time over the last couple of years. He's drafted offensive potential players. Isaiah Collier is an example of that last year at 29. Kyle Filipowski at the beginning of the second round, another example of that. At some point, the Jazz are going to have to prioritize defense if they want to start winning at a higher level, but we haven't seen Danny Ainge do that, so it's hard for me to sit here and mock that he's going to draft defensive-minded guys at picks 5 or 21 in this year's draft class. Pick 22, the Atlanta Hawks on the board once again after going with Noah Essengue at pick number 13. Atlanta has the opportunity here to add in extra talent around that, and specifically in that big man spot. I mentioned earlier how they are lacking a backup big behind Nique Okongwu, and I think finding a skilled one here who could be another good short roll option off of Trae Young is an interesting way to go about it. 22nd overall, I have the Atlanta Hawks here selecting forward/center Danny Wolf. This is a player who gives Atlanta some lineup flexibility. Of course, after drafting Essengue, they've already added a player into their front court who will likely play the power forward spot more often than not. But Wolf gives you some of that lineup versatility. If you want to play him next to Essengue, you have a long athlete to protect Danny Wolf defensively if Wolf's the center. But if you want to play him as the 4, you can put him next to a Okongwu. Okongwu's got enough foot speed to guard different kinds of players. Danny Wolf, of course, has been tasked throughout the college ranks of guarding 4s. It's definitely something I think he'll be capable of in certain select matchups. And for the Hawks offensively, the whole point of this is to get more playmaking juice. Atlanta just really needs more guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot. That's what Danny Wolf projects to be as a big man. A common player comparison for Danny Wolf is likely Kelly Olynyk. That's the type of player that I could see Atlanta looking at here and saying, there's some definite value we can uncover with this. Wolf can be a player who can be connective into our offense, fit off of Trae Young extremely well, give us a little bit more juice, maybe be an inverted ball screener for Jalen Johnson. You can do a lot of different things, right? And I think with the Hawks having a pretty interesting infrastructure in place already, they get to take a stab here with this pick, and betting on skill is never a bad idea in the NBA draft. And Wolf is just so skilled at his size that I think he's going to return value for whoever ultimately drafts him. And I think the Hawks walk away with a pretty solid player here at number 22. Which now brings us to the Indiana Pacers at number 23. What a great season it's been for Indiana, of course, making it to the NBA Finals this year. Shout out to my Pacers fans watching the channel right now. And 23rd overall for Indiana specifically in this mock draft, I have them going with center Ryan Kalkbrenner out of Creighton. This is an older prospect, and I actually haven't had the Pacers drafting center too frequently in my prior mock drafts. But after really sitting and thinking about it more, watching Tony Bradley throughout the Eastern Conference Finals, I was watching the game when James Wiseman tore his Achilles to begin the year. They've just had so many injuries at the center spot, especially. Miles Turner's an unrestricted free agent. I'm sure that they will pay him and keep him. I would be shocked if they don't. But the backup center spot is still a real question. Isaiah Jackson dealt with the torn Achilles this year as well. This team just needs a long-term big who can be a beneficial piece for them. And Ryan Kalkbrenner is an analytics darling in this year's draft class. Extreme rim volume, extreme rim success as well. Shot over 70% on two-pointers this year for the Creighton Blue Jays as a go-to player with a very high offensive usage rate for his position especially, and a very high points per game volume scorer role. So I think for Indiana, you slate him in next to Tyrese Halliburton. It gives you more of that traditional screen and roll, lob threat kind of big, a lot of dunk volume this year for Kalkbrenner. And for everyone who's watching him, and for a lot of the people who are very, very smart, look at all the analytics and numbers and say, Ryan Kalkbrenner stands out in a good way. He's a real outlier in a lot of positive measures. Indiana's walking out with a player who just fits very, very smoothly into their offense, can also function as a rim protector, blocks shots very well. Of course, has had experience with, FIBA U18. I've been watching Kalkbrenner for 5-6 years at this point in time. This is a guy who is destined for an NBA career. He's going to have a value role on a team as a backup big man, and I think Indiana walks away pretty happy with this selection at number 23, given what the roster is currently lacking. 24, we're back to the topic of the OKC Thunder, and after going with Collin Murray-Boyles at pick number 15, the Thunder here at 24 select guard Ben Saraf out of Ratio Farm Ulm, another dribble pass shoot prospect. Sam Presti cannot get enough of this archetype of a player who is just extremely skilled with the ball in his hands. Of course, he drafted Nikola Topic last year, someone who has more of the emphasis on the pass than the dribble and the shoot. Saraf's got a little bit more of that dribble and off the dribble shooting that Topic was kind of lacking even as a prospect. And I think Saraf, specifically if you look at what he was able to do in Euro Cup this year, playing for Ratio Farm Ulm in Germany and having so much success over there with the ball in his hands as a high volume ball handler, pick and roll ball handler. There's just a lot to work with here. And while the Thunder definitely can't give him minutes right away, there's just not enough time in an NBA game for OKC to play 13, 14, 15 guys like they'd maybe want to. Saraf can definitely return some value. I mean, the Thunder drafted AJ Mitchell last year, who I really, really liked. Like there's a little bit of overlap here with AJ Mitchell and Ben Saraf. AJ Mitchell, another really good guard who can handle, get the spots on the floor and score. Saraf has similar characteristics, which is why I think OKC would consider him. Now, I think the best thing for the Thunder to do would be trading pick 15 and pick 24, probably both of them, unless a guy slides down in the draft a little bit, like Collin Murray-Boyles in this example that you saw at 15, and trying to accrue more future draft picks down the road to keep their flexibility open long term. But worst case scenario, coming out of the draft with Collin Murray-Boyles and Ben Saraf is pretty darn good for OKC at these spots in the class. 25th, back to the Orlando Magic, who, remember, at number 16 went with Jase Richardson, and now Orlando can come back here and address a big man spot if they want to. After going with that smaller guard, if they're looking to lock down a cost-controlled rookie scale contract at the center spot in order to save some money long term, if they trade Goga Bitadze, for example, they could actually open up a lot of savings, maybe even dip out of the first apron completely this year, which would be really good for them. And obviously that ownership group would be probably incentivized to save some money both long-term and short-term right now. So I do think center is definitely in the cards for the Magic if they keep both of these selections. 25th overall, I have the Magic here selecting Joan Berenger out of Cedevita Olympia in the Adriatic League. Adriatic League finished up a couple seasons ago. He's going to get over stateside here relatively soon. Might even already be in the States at the time I am posting this video. But Berenger is definitely a guy who I think could climb down the final weeks of this process because of his athletic tools. And I think once the team sees him work out, they're going to be pretty impressed with his above the rim play, his physical gifts. He led the entire Adriatic League as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old player in block rate. And there is some impressive tools to work with, and I think for Orlando specifically, who has built such a good team defense, some really sticky point of attack defenders, a lot of length and size to insulate their team defense, getting someone who can really play above the rim like Berenger and have a real rim protection role for them provides some pretty immediate impact in his minutes. Now, I don't think he's going to be a super high minutes per game contributor, but with Wendell Carter Jr.'s injury history, you might need him for stretches of play anyway. So Berenger can definitely return some value. Hopefully Mo Wagner is healthy again next season and playing a pretty good role for them. We'll see what happens with all the contracts there in Orlando and if they try and shave some salary one way or another. But the Magic at 25 walking out with Berenger, I do think gives them a long-term center prospect to continue growing, developing, and gives them someone who can win at the rim a bit more than they already currently do, which I think would be quite good for their offensive team context as well when it comes to above the rim finishing. 26, we're back onto the Brooklyn Nets after going with Knueppel and Newell. The Nets have back-to-back selections here via New York and Houston at 26 and 27 respectively. 26th overall for Brooklyn, we are going to start with Hugo Gonzalez, forward out of Real Madrid. I made this same pick last week because I do think for Brooklyn, first of all, if they keep all four of these selections, I don't think they're going to be super focused on drafting only win-now players. They're going to be looking at developmental bets. They're going to be looking at players who have skilled opportunities to grow their game and give them on-ball reps, give them more minutes than what even Gonzalez had this past year playing for Real Madrid, where the minutes were pretty sparing. The impact when he was on the court, though, was pretty evident. Had some really good moments for them. Now, it wasn't super consistent, wasn't super reliable game to game, but Gonzalez, when he was on the court, did have an impact. But I think one of the biggest questions for him moving forward is the shooting reliability. Is he going to be a good enough shooter to be a real threat from the NBA three-point line? But there's dribble pass skills here. There is some shooting touch. I mean, if you do actually watch his film, you go back to a lot of his FIBA tape as well, there's pretty good indicators that this guy's going to have a developmental growth here where there's a lot to work with, a lot of actual ball skills. And for a player of his size with really solid athletic traits, he's not an elite athlete, but can play above the rim, very functional in his athleticism, and a very smart approach to the game with his selflessness. This is a guy who, for Brooklyn specifically, I think can have a really solid, strong impact for them down the road, especially playing in such a read and react system like what Jordi Fernandez is trying to instill there in Brooklyn after his first season as the coach. 27th now, Brooklyn still on the clock, like I mentioned, with this pick from the Rockets. And now with this pick, I have Brooklyn selecting guard Nolan Traore out of St. Quentin. They're going to take stabs on international prospects with significant upside. Now, Traore, a lot of that upside is perceived upside because of his positional size. I think a lot of it will be limited and ultimately halted by his shooting touch and kind of lack thereof. He has not shot the ball well at all. His true shooting percentage is basically in the mud for St. Quentin. Now, he has had some really, really strong showings, especially over the last month and a half or so, that do breathe a little bit of life into his draft stock. And I definitely see teams still holding a first-round grade on him. He's a bigger guard who can really handle the ball, get downhill. There is a lot to work with, and if you're confident in his shooting mechanics and that you can turn around his actual shot efficiency and scoring prowess, this is a player who, remember, about a year ago at this point in time, was putting up 40-plus points in key games a year ago. Now, he hasn't held up that kind of reputation and stock this year, and I think it would be really unfair to the other prospects to put so much weight on what Traore was doing a year ago in comparison to some of the others. Like, you look at Liam McNeely, a guy who has had his draft stock fall significantly because of some of the difficulties he's had over the last year or so, and a lot of people do avoid looking back at his high school tape. I think all things considered, you do have to take that multi-year approach. You have to look at where a prospect was, what maybe is going wrong in his development. And I think in this pro league, not only is he facing better athletes, better rim protection, but I think one thing that has been a challenge is how teams are guarding him in the pick and roll. That's been his bread and butter in the past, and now with teams aggressively going under, ducking under screens, forcing him to take and make jump shots super consistently, it has hampered his efficiency and his success as a driver of the basketball, and that also limits his overall value as a facilitator of the basketball. So I think for Brooklyn here, you're looking at, and you're really hoping that as an off-ball player off of DHOs and using him in a variety of different ways rather than just spamming high ball screens, maybe you can unlock and uncover some of that potential we saw a year ago in things he was accomplishing and doing back then that he just isn't doing or performing at that level of anymore in a more difficult team context setting and league over there in France. 28th now, we go on to the Boston Celtics, a team with potential huge changes coming. We'll see what they end up being. I continue to struggle figuring out what those trades might look like. Porzingis, could he get moved? Very definitely. Drew Holiday will have an interesting, strong market. Would be very fascinating to see what he gets moved for. But Boston at 28, this is a really great opportunity for them to add talent. I have looked at centers in the past. Maxime Reynaud was my mock selection for them last week. But 28th overall here, I have the Boston Celtics selecting forward Adu Thiero out of Arkansas. This is the second time in the last 3 years now that they will have drafted a wing defensive type out of Arkansas. Of course, a few years ago took Jordan Walsh, a guy who I still think down the road could maybe crack into that Celtics rotation. We'll see how that kind of pans out. But Thiero specifically is a much better athlete and a much better offensive player than Jordan Walsh. Much better touch of the rim and way more functionally athletic in terms of his play strength, ability to play into traffic. Very reminiscent for me of OG Anunoby with the functionality of his athleticism. And this is a guy, if Boston finds a way to hit on some of these later picks. Last year, I really liked their Shireman selection at number 30. At number 28, if they're able to walk away with Adu Thiero, they are going to be a scary team still long-term, even if they do have to shave off of their current roster, cut some salary, whatever that ends up looking like. Boston, if they navigate this correctly, if they make the right decisions on draft night, and if certain guys fall to them in this kind of way like Thiero does here at 28, he can return really strong value for them. And I think Boston, specifically walking away with this pick, makes them a whole lot stronger long-term. It gives them another really good dog-type player on the defensive side of the floor who can fill gaps, protect the rim, go up, rebound the basketball, win you extra possessions that way. Just brings a lot of little nuanced value to the Celtics at number 28. And in the absence of Jason Tatum this next season, hopefully there's more developmental opportunity for Shireman, Thiero, giving them opportunity and minutes going into next season. Number 29, the Phoenix Suns here on the clock now. Of course, last couple of years have been a struggle for them, getting swept in the first round in the 2024 playoffs at the hands of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and then completely missing the 2025 postseason altogether, missed the play-in even, and now a Kevin Durant trade very likely on the horizon. The next iteration of Suns basketball very well could be on the way. We'll see if Devin Booker is a part of that or not. 29th overall, though, the Suns, they're going to try and take a stab here, try and improve this team pretty drastically right now. They're going to take a swing on an upside pick in forward, Will Riley. This is a guy who right now is going to struggle if you give him a lot of minutes in the NBA. I do not think he's ready for NBA minutes, but he is a skilled long-term developmental draft pick, and it kind of scares me for Phoenix. They seem to mishandle a lot of things. I'm not sure if they're going to be the team to uncover this potential or not. But offensively, there is dribble, pass, shoot skills to work with as a 6'8" wing forward type. And that is what will be the appeal for NBA teams. Now, Will Riley comes with his own host of issues. I talked about play strength for Essengue earlier. Will Riley is thin like a beanstalk. This guy is not going to be able to play into contact, play into traffic. His rim numbers, I think, are going to be quite low his first couple years in the NBA. That's okay. Again, you're looking at the development of his pull-up jump shooting. You're looking at the skilled components of his game as a dribble, pass, shoot prospect, and you're hoping that with some weight training, conditioning, and just flat-out lifting more, he can get stronger and have a better actual play strength on the court that will open up other areas of his game and elements of his game that he doesn't really get to a lot right now. Now, I do think Will Riley still has some really bad tendencies as well, just outside of functional play strength, like very low stock numbers for Illinois, even in significant minutes, just wasn't impactful defensively. Extremely low steal rate, incredibly low block rate for a 6'8" player. This is a guy who defensively has a lot of work yet to do to become impactful on that end of the floor. So this is kind of a risky pick for Phoenix, one that, while it does come with an interesting ceiling, it also comes with a pretty low floor, and one that could really haunt Phoenix down the road. With who, other safer prospects could be like a Maxime Reynaud, Walter Clayton Jr., even guys who are second-round picks that a lot of people aren't even high on could return better value long-term than what Will Riley might bring to Phoenix at 29. Now on to the final pick of the first round, the Los Angeles Clippers here with this selection, and I think for LA especially, we have kind of pivoted back and forth between backup point guard, backup center. Last week we mocked Ryan Kalkbrenner to them at number 30. In this mock draft, Kalkbrenner went off the board at number 23. Now Maxime Reynaud could be an option, but he doesn't really bring that anchor ability as much as what I think the Clippers will be looking for at this spot. Now, I don't want to completely rule out Reynaud. He would definitely be still on the board here for the Clippers and a strong consideration. But with this player being available, 30th overall, I have the Los Angeles Clippers selecting guard Walter Clayton Jr. out of Florida. Feels like his draft range is in that kind of mid-20s to like maybe early 30s range. Very likely will be a first-round pick. Wouldn't be completely shocked if he slid into the second round a little bit. One of the biggest things that concern me for him as a higher volume ball handler is a pretty low free throw rate, and I think that puts a pretty hard ceiling on his potential. He's not going to play into physicality. He's not going to get to the line a bunch. But what he does do very well is shoot the ball, and I think he can handle the ball at a successful rate for the Clippers, which is something they really badly need off the bench. Behind James Harden, to begin the year, they were relying on Kevin Porter Jr., and that's just not something you can really do and try and win at a high level, especially come playoff time. Walter Clayton Jr. might give them more of that functionality, and then when he is off the ball, if you're playing him either alongside James Harden or just next to Kawhi Leonard in some of those minutes with Harden on the bench, Walter Clayton Jr., of course, his shooting, three-point volume, and success rate historically as a three-point shooter is what's going to bring some real value for the Clippers when he's in an off-ball role. So for Los Angeles here, it's a pretty safe pick. You're drafting a guard who won a national title, was extremely impactful for Florida, really kind of carried their offense for stretches as well. He's used to playing off of DHOs, off of Alex Condon. I think there's some juice you can work with there with Ivica Zubac. I think the Clippers, it's just like it's a really safe pick. It's another ball handler, another guy who can just kind of fill a little void that this Clippers team currently has at that backup point guard spot going into next season. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more NBA content. Thank you all so much for watching. Really do appreciate you guys, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.